it's heavily focused on statistics, so leave now if you don't like numbers. So I'm Tony Gunnarsson, Principal Analyst, OTT Video at Ovum. I've got 30 minutes, and I have a lot of things to get through, so I'm just going to jump straight into it. OTT Video in Asia, pricing strategies, what works and what actually do not work. So I'm from a global research company called Ovum. We're based in the UK, but we are pretty much available or active everywhere around the world. I'm a native Swede, and I'm based out of Sweden. And I wanted to start this session by giving you a Swedish proverb. Kärt barn har många namn. I think it's appropriate when we talk about OTT video because there are many different definitions. So a love child has many names. OTT, internet, digital, streaming, online, TVOD, FVOD, AVOD, SVOD, SLIN, D2C, etc. For the purposes of this presentation, I'll be talking about OTT video services that are available through the open internet as standalone services. They do not require any associated pay TV or telco services. They are sold, as I say, on the open internet without any requirement for special hardware or networks. And there are, of course, hundreds of these services around the world. So, OTT video is currently transitioning from a small side business into the main show in town. Over the last decade, we've seen the number of subscribers on a global basis go from under 50 million in 2011, and just within arm's reach, really, 2021, we're going to have more than 1 billion OTT video subscribers worldwide. I'm not going to read all the text, because we'll be here all day, but essentially, OTT video, certainly in developed markets, have grown into a mass market business, and it's characterized by households buying multiple subscription services. They're essentially self-bundling. Of course, as we will see throughout my presentation, that tends to vary depending on what market you're looking at. Global OTT video has, in the 2010s, been dominated largely by Netflix, but also by Amazon. Of course, between them, they take about 20% of the world's premium paid-for streaming market. Both of them are available in all markets of the world except China, and a few select markets that are sort of banned by the US government, like Syria and North Korea and Iran. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about Netflix and Amazon. Most people will be familiarized with those services. But I wanted to, before I move on to talk about Asia, just talk a little bit about sort of key trends for OTT video in general. And like the Facebook relationship status update, it's complicated. The story of OTT video is usually told through a combination of these two charts. Either OTT video is seen as a threat to pay TV, one that is inevitably growing faster than pay TV and will one day change the world as we know it, or it's a friendly force that simply grows on top of pay TV. Subscribers to pay TV are simply adding services like Netflix on top. The reality is, of course, a lot more complicated than that. But on complication, OTT video is a huge fragmented mess of a market. There are so many services available that it's lucky that you have people like me, frankly, to add some sense to it. So just to illustrate that, I have brought this chart. It looks at the US. The most extreme case, since it is the largest market in the world still, although China is rapidly catching up. In the US, there are between 150 and 200 active streaming services. It's absolutely insane. Out of them, modestly at Ovum, we tracked 65 of them individually. The other ones we consider to be small enough or too small to be covering as analysts. But out of those, 26 currently have more than 1 million subscribers, and in 5 years' time, more than 30 services will have more than 1 million subscriptions. In terms of the size of the market, currently 220 million plus subscriptions, more than households. There are more subscribers than households in the US, and of course the market continues to grow. And these are, I would hasten to add, quite conservative forecasts. So that gives you a sense of how Americans are multi-buyers. It would be impossible for all of these services to operate unless people bought more than one service. Of course, the market is, of course, dominated by a handful of key services, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, and we, like most people, expect Disney Plus to join the top ranks in the US. In terms of consumers, I believe that OTT video is or has become a truly mainstream phenomenon today. It's something that is enjoyed by all age groups. This is based on a consumer research study that we did last year. So these might not be, these numbers might have grown in proportion. But what's interesting here, I feel, is that up until recently we talked about OTT video as being something skewed towards younger people. I've been doing these conferences for quite some time. We spend a lot of time, wasted years, talking about millennials, as if this is something that only young people do. That's obviously not the case, although there is some truth in the fact that pay TV tends to be skewed towards older demographics. But the interesting thing here is that it's in black, the age group over 70. Yes, it's true, they are the least frequent online video streamers, but last year about 20% said that they had access to services like OTT video at home, which is something that would have been quite controversial if we had talked about that, say, 5 years ago at conferences. No one really expected that to happen so quickly. I'm here, of course, to talk about Asia. So to contextualize Asia, to put it in a proportion on global markets, North America, of course, is the biggest market. Half of all revenues for OTT video is currently concentrated in North America. But Asia is the second combined largest market, and that is taking the sort of central and southern as well as eastern and southeastern Asia. What's interesting here is that historically, Western Europe has always been the second largest market for entertainment, for home video, not so with OTT. Here, Asia is bigger than Europe. And as we will see, this is despite prices being lower in Asia than in Western Europe. Looking at Asia, if you've seen the program for today, you will know that one market completely overshadows everything else, namely China. 60% of Asian OTT video revenues are from China. And if we take the top 5 markets, which includes Japan, South Korea, Australia, and India, more than 90% of the market is from 5 key markets. Now, OTT video does not exist in a vacuum. It needs, I would argue, TV households in order to grow. And if they are pay TV households, even better. So putting pay TV in Asia into context, across the region, 68% of TV households currently pay for some sort of TV. That's actually relatively high, but that obscures the fact that markets from market vary quite greatly. As you can see on this graph, we're ranging from 92% down to 13%. And that brings me to my next point, that Asia as a whole is one of the most diverse markets in the world, culturally, language, multiple languages, and of course, different levels of economic maturity. That makes this region a difficult one for many transnational services and players. They have to tailor content and strategy, and as you will see, pricing according to the market that they target. Of course, that is the case for any multinational company, but more so in this region than in any other in the world. OTT video is currently at 40% of the combined TV and OTT video subscription market. So total TV subscriptions plus total OTT subscriptions, then 40% of that is OTT video currently. It's clear that OTT video does best in markets where high pay TV penetration, where there's a high penetration of pay TV. A pay TV audience equals a ready-made market for OTT video services. There is some, I can qualify that. Of course, in some markets, pay TV is actually quite cheap. And, you know, markets like Vietnam and their OTT video faces a compelling challenge to how to sell into markets where consumers do not expect to pay a lot of money for entertainment. What more can I say here? A handful of markets are already dominated by OTT video, meaning that more than half the market is made of OTT video subscription services. Singapore, Australia, New Zealand. There is another thing that makes Asia special, and that is the high proportion of OTT video being generated through carrier billing. Carrier billing refers to services that are sold and billed through bundling and other types of partnership with telcos. Only Africa is up there with Asia in terms of the proportion. I would argue that carrier billing, certainly from the point of view of OTT video services, is a tool that is used in markets specifically where they struggle to access consumers directly on their own. In other words, they need operator partners because they are not able to reach consumers otherwise. That is more so for foreign services like Netflix and Amazon, of course. There is also, so you can see China, Australia, South Korea, part of the key markets of this region, and carrier billing is a smaller proportion of those markets. There's some difference, India, Japan, and the reason why we have a higher proportion here is, of course, due to local services that are focused on local content and perhaps lower price points are more active, are sort of dominating their markets, and foreign services are struggling to penetrate on their own, so therefore they rely on carrier billing. Okay, so what services actually work in Asia Pacific? So I'm not going to read all of this text. It's for the vast majority of people here, it will be relevant to you, but just to explain what we're looking at. At Ovum, if you remember the chart I showed you for North America, for the US, with 200 plus services, it's quite difficult to understand what type of service works, and therefore we have applied classification to those services. Some services we call SVOD, some services we call SLIN. SLIN refers to linear companies that operate on a Netflix model, but with linear content. Not all of them are live or linear. Some of them might actually do more on demand, but nonetheless, we call them as such. My point here is to highlight the type of services that are successful as a premium paid for service in Asia, and pay TV services and Netflix-like services are the most dominant ones. And actually, compared to America and Europe, direct-to-consumer services like HBO and Disney+, which is coming, of course, are very underdeveloped markets here, and there's not a lot of potential for those services based on how the markets are performing today. Sports services are starting to grow, driven by services like DAZN in Japan, which is aggregating sports like a Netflix would. But outside of that, it's not a lot of things going. It's SVOD and pay TV, it's lean-type services. As I said earlier, the services, the markets across Asia are at different pace of maturity. Of course, the top 5 markets overshadow the rest of the region. So I think a more appropriate way to look at this market would be by grouping markets by the average monthly subscription fee. So ahead of this event, we spent a fair deal of time, me and my team, looking at pricing from all the different services available on these markets and looking at how big their base of subscribers were, and then mapping out the market shares, and so by this way coming up with the average per market. And this is how this is what we came up with. So we have a first group of countries, first group of countries which are characterized as being relatively developed. Here, OTT video tends to cost more than $7 per month. We have a medium or a middle group where services are priced between $4 and $6 or $7 per month, and a whole range of smaller markets and some very big markets where OTT video costs in general, or on average, less than $4 per month. So the next slides I have are very heavy on data. I'm not going to bore you by explaining everything you see. This deck will be available to everyone who attends this conference, should they wish so. So you can spend some time perhaps looking at these numbers, these statistics at your own leisure. But for now, I wanted to show you the top 5 services across the high subscription type markets. We've got Australia, Japan, South Korea, and Hong Kong. Starting with Japan, local services do, of course, dominate, but the US majors are increasingly making an entry there. South Korea, similar story to Japan, local services dominate. Australia, which, as you might guess, performs or behaves similar to an European market, for cultural reasons, obviously. And here we have Netflix and Amazon essentially taking majority market shares, with local services competing for what is a minority of the market. Hong Kong is a relatively small market that where not a lot of things were happening in Hong Kong in terms of standalone streaming, but when Netflix launched, most of local IPTV services and pay TV operators launched services, and they are now doing quite well. In the medium subscription charge group, I should have invented something more catchy to describe them, but this will do for now. Situation is slightly similar, local services versus foreign services. Of course, Singapore and Thailand and Malaysia, which I didn't include for purposes of space, are general, good characteristics of Southeast Asia, of course. Kazakhstan and Pakistan are small markets, not a lot of things happening there. And then finally, we have the low subscription charge markets, those markets where OTT video is priced under $4 per month. And of course, China is a unique case market where foreign companies aren't allowed to directly launch services. So you'll see big name local companies performing particularly well there. India, we talked about already today, and then some of the smaller markets there. Now, what's interesting about the pricing is how they relate to pay TV prices. So in general, I think it's fair to say that high subscription type markets are markets characterized by more expensive pay TV services, which allows for higher charge for OTT video. Australia is an extreme here, and you can recognize that OTT video is a fairly compelling alternative to pay TV. Even if you buy free services, you're still saving money buying streaming services over pay TV. In the medium subscription charge markets, the opposite is true, or the same sort of logic applies. Lower prices require lower OTT prices. And then finally, the low subscription charge, where pricing is not necessarily set by TV, but by local OTT video services, which dominate here. And what I would call out is perhaps, again, Vietnam, where OTT video costs more than pay TV and will make it very difficult for any streaming service to succeed under such circumstances. Okay, we've already talked a little bit about alternative models today. Alternative models, like hybrid models, they are gaining traction in this region. They represent an alternative to the sort of Western model, essentially. So we've got a select few services here, which are all characterized as having enormous numbers of mostly free users, which they can then aggressively convert to paying subscribers with the lure of very low monthly subscription costs. Conversion rates tend to be between 5 and 10%. Of course, there's some variation on this. And I just wanted to show this as an example of alternative models. Now, ahead of this event, we did some new and exclusive research with consumers. I'm showing you some extracts from this research. Would be here all day if I were to explain everything. But I picked out what I thought was interesting. So we talked to people that subscribe to online video and asked them about how they behave, their perceptions, and so on. And we also talked to people that don't currently subscribe to services. And we asked them, why do you not subscribe to any online video streaming service? You can see the answers here. Most of them said that my current TV service is good enough. They don't need more content than that. Related, they said they don't binge TV, so they don't need OTT video. So that's a perception that OTT video is all about binge viewing. If I was at a streaming company in Southeast Asia, I think I would put out a marketing campaign to say that you don't need to binge our services. You can replace, TV with OTT video. It's a similar thing, but better. But interestingly, a third said that they cannot afford streaming services. So we had a number of follow-up questions. One was about price. Here we used last year's average prices. I've just added in the sort of current rate of conversion to US dollars to make it consistent with what I showed you previously. Not surprisingly, half of all respondents said that this is too expensive. So clearly, OTT video suffers from a pricing perception problem. And interestingly, this does not, the issue of affordability transcends the sort of developed versus developing market lines. Even Australians thought that $8 per month is too expensive, just as Indians at $4 per month said it was too expensive. We ran some pricing bands. How much would you be willing to pay for a service on the internet that had all or most of your desired content, the type of series or sports or whatever it is, how much would you pay? Reassuringly, some of our respondents did say that they would be willing to pay for such service, but not surprisingly, a lot of people went for cheaper price bands. And worryingly, a lot of people also said that they wouldn't be interested in paying anything. So 23% in Singapore said that they would pay nothing for a service that contains their most desired content. Not a particularly great message if you're working at the streaming company here. So we also asked about ads. would you be willing to accept adverts on your streaming service in order to pay less or nothing? Not surprisingly, a lot of people said that they would. Of course, I'm always quite skeptical or conscious about consumer research. It's, you know, they might behave very differently if they had the chance than how they answer to these surveys. But I think it's indicative of where a market is at a greater level than if we simply look at those people that have already converted into, you know, using these type of services. I only had 30 minutes, and I'm nearly done. And I thought I'd going to leave you with some observations about the future. I am a forecaster, and a lot of the work we do is explaining what to expect in the 2020s. The 2020s is just around the corner, and we are seeing a slate of next-generation OTT video services launching. Apple TV Plus, as part of the greater Apple TV app, is already launched, available in 100 markets around the world. Disney Plus, of course, has finally also launched. Unlike Apple, Disney is taking a more gradual approach to its international rollout, but they have said that they are going to be in key markets before the end of next year. Sorry, I seem to think that was already in 2020, year after, 2021. Other US major services to come, launching Q2 next year, is HBO Max and Peacock, and of course there are a range of other services that are also coming. International strategy for services like HBO Max and Peacock is, they basically said that yes, we are going to do it, but there's very little information about timing. So at Ovum, we've taken the sort of easy option of saying it's going to be within the next 3 to 5 years. That might change. As you know, in the next few months, they're going to step up the marketing around these services, and investors will want to know those type of things. I would interpret the arrival of these major services as follows. Firstly, next year will be a major milestone year for online video. It will resemble 2016, the year when both Netflix and Amazon became global services. So 2020, it's a major milestone year. It begins tougher time for local services in developed markets, services that perhaps is already struggling with US major services. The immediate years are likely to be characterized by intensive competition for OTT video subscribers on a global, regional, national, and local level. Just taking what's going to happen in the US, we know most of these services are launching there, adding up prospected subscriber take-up is going to, you know, immediately add more than 20 million new subscriptions to an already overly saturated US market. These services are all coming to market with pricing that undercuts Netflix. They're all being incredibly aggressive, certainly Disney, you know, offering various bundles and promotional benefits to sign up to the service. And the prospect of a fully blown pricing war for video in the US is actually quite real. And of course, we know that some of these services will operate on a hybrid model with free or ad-funded models with a premium tier where you pay to remove adverts. So today, I would say that OTT video exists, or the relationship between OTT video and pay TV is a sort of quasi-harmonic relationship. I think the coming of these next-generation services is going to upset that. There's going to be further disruption of broadcast TV and pay TV. Of course, more consumers are going to experiment with more services. So in the 2020s will be an interesting time for pay TV and for broadcast TV. And finally, you know, mid-2020s, we're going to have a more mature streaming business. It's going to be supported by a mass market of multi-subscription buying households. Of course, bearing in mind regional differences, market to market, it's going to be looking quite different. But overall, that's the trend that we see. And with that, I have actually 20 seconds left, so I think I succeeded in my brief for today. I've got an email. You can email me. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, all the rest of it. And do come and see me if you have any questions. I'll be here most of the week. So thank you very much.